Alrighty, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about Maribell. Maribell is one of the most versatile characters in the game. Unlike some of the other 4 stars like Lucas or Amir, who are kind of pigeonholed in terms of the team comps they can fit into, they can maybe count on one hand the number of team comps you could form with them, at least right now. Maribell is very, very flexible. She is a Vanguard, and even though she is 4-star, many players, including myself, would consider the tankiest character in the game. The other 5 stars like Felipe and Magna have mechanics like damage and counters that may make them stronger overall compared to Maribell, but Maribell may be the tankiest character in the game. She's also a big hugger according to the lore, not according to me. And she also is a passion character, which is the red element, which makes her great for chaos runs 1 through 3 and the 5th one, because about half the enemies will have the red element. So she has a wide variety of usages. She's very serviceable even at low dupes, even if you just have her E0. And with that, let's get started and welcome to Maribell. So when we talk about Maribell, we have to, of course, start with talking about how you tank in Chaos Zero Nightmare. And this is analogous to most games, how you maximize DPS in your output. You don't want to put all of your eggs into one defensive or one offensive stat, usually. So there's oftentimes some niche characters, but most characters, for example, in CZN for attack, they don't want to put all of their eggs in the attack basket. They want some attack, they want some crit rate, they want some crit damage, they might want some type of elemental advantage. Other games you might want some type of defense reduction. You might want some applications of vulnerable to increase and morale, etc., to increase your total damage output. You want to have a wide variety of these different stat lines that combine together multiplicatively. The same idea applies for defense. You don't want all of your eggs in the shield basket to just maximize the number of shield that you have, because getting that little bit of extra shield when you could have instead invested it in something like Resolve, which buffs all your shield, Fortitude, which reduces damage taken or damage reduction, or Weaken, or there's just a bunch of different things that you could go to, or Healing to make up for the damage that you weren't able to reduce fully by shield. These kinds of things are important to think about when you're building a team. And Maribell starts you off on the right foot because she offers both shielding and weaken through her legendary card that we'll talk about in a little bit. But I say that because one advantage she has over Felipe and Magna, who are the 5-star Vanguards, is that Felipe and Magna both only have one defensive stat. They have shield. They don't have any of the other options that I just mentioned. Amir offers 2. Amir offers both damage reduction and resolve, but she doesn't actually have the shield, so she requires a shield character to come along with her to get that shield bit chase, basically. But Maribell offers 2 of them on her own. And I say that as my main point for why I think Maribell is the tankiest character in the game as of right now. Now first, let's look at her cards. Her basics are pretty straightforward. She does have 3 different basic cards. She has a standard attack, 2 standard skills for defense. So you're going to want to get rid of these pretty early on in a chaos run. And then you will always start every game with your Resolute Blitz, and then you can earn access to the other ones as you play the game. So your Resolute Blitz is a Pulverize. So first we need to talk about the Pulverize mechanic. It is basically bonus damage against shields. If the enemy was shielded at all, when you hit them with your Pulverize, you will deal 20% bonus damage. And I believe this is multiplicative, but I haven't tested the numbers. And so basically she does well against shield units, and this is really nice for the Chaos Run 5. If you ever are running 5, you can pair her with somebody like Magna and they can do incredible amounts of damage. And that's relevant if you're running Chaos number 5, because a lot of the units in Chaos 5 have shields, and most notably the bosses do. And so you'll oftentimes get this bonus 20% damage. Now, this Resolute Blitz is not the most relevant card for her. I think it's pretty flexible which one that you go for, depending on the type of build. We'll talk about builds in a second, but basically from this card, you're getting some damage, you're getting the Pulverize effect, and you're getting some counterattack. There are ones that give you maybe a little bit more counterattack. You can spend an extra AP to hit all enemies, and there's also an upgrade card that can be nice, but basically you're doing some damage and getting some counterattacks. Her next card is the Maribell Shelter MK.2. It is quite a mouthful. It is also the pulverize effect, so she has 3 cards with pulverize, so she's very much angled towards hitting enemies that have shields. This also does some defense-based damage, but in turn, instead of a counterattack, you gain shield. And this shield is dependent on how much damage you dealt to their HP. And so this card is kind of a little bit interesting because you want the pulverized bonus damage. So you want to hit a shielded enemy, but you want the shield to be very low. You want the shield to be like 1 shield or 10 shield or 20 shield, because the damage you do to the shield does not convert to a fixed shield that you get. So here in this video that I'm showing, you can kind of see the ideal target for her Maribell Shelter MK2. If you hit an enemy that has only shield, you'll deal lots of damage, but if you don't deal any damage to their HP, you get no shield, like this guy here. If you deal damage to an enemy, but they had no shield, then you'll get this amount of shield. And you might think that's the maximum, but you actually get the most shield if you hit an enemy that has a small amount of shield, because you get the pulverized bonus damage, and then you break through the shield really quickly, and then you deal a lot of damage to them. So to actually maximize the shield, you want to hit an enemy with a very, very small amount of shield. This is kind of a very niche thing. Most people, I think, aren't thinking about this at all when they're playing this card. They're just like, oh, I get a shield. And they don't realize it's the damage to the HP. So something to think about when you play this card, generally speaking. Another thing to note is that it is capped. The shield is capped at 20% of your max HP. So there's 2 things to think about with that. One, most of the time people say the HP stat on your memory fragments and other sources like that is pretty useless, but in my opinion, it's very strong for Maribell because it increases the cap of the shield that you can get, right? If you have, 1000 HP, you can only get a maximum of 200 HP shield. If you have 2000, that goes up to 4000 or 400, right? So, and because of that, when we look at her epiphany options, if you have lower HP, you should probably stick with one of these 1 costs or maybe even the 0 cost, because you're probably going to be close to capping the shield. And I would not invest in this 2 cost here because the 2 cost does a lot more damage, but it's very, very likely to hit this 20% of max HP. You're not going to get the full value of the shield unless you know that you already have buffed up your HP because you gave her some HP memory fragments. Maybe you took an event that increased your HP or something like that, and you know that you're going to be getting that value. Otherwise, I would probably avoid this epiphany out the gate just because you're going to be maxing out that fixed shield. She does have an option here that screams, play me with a counterattack card, and that is the one that deals 150% and then scales 50% more for each counterattack. You can max out at 10 counterattacks. So assuming this is additive, this becomes a 650% ratio, which is very, very strong for a 2-cost card. You can compare that to a lot of other characters, 2-cost cards that are in the 200 300 range. This is basically like a fully stacked up Haru, anchor shot, but again on a 4-star that's meant to be a little bit defensive, so it's not going to deal as much damage, but still you didn't have to play it 5 times to get that value out of it. So it can be very strong if you want to go down that route. And then the other ones are all very similar in terms of their value. And then one more thing to note is that her epiphany here that deals to all enemies, it will also very easily cap the fixed shield, assuming that the enemies don't have shields in the first place, because you're hitting multiple enemies. So again, against AoE, pretty straightforward. Her 3rd card is always an upgrade and is the Wolf's Dome. Basically, it is your counterattack generator. You will always be getting counterattack from this card, but you'll get other things depending on which one you pick. In general, if you want to play a more defensive version of Maribell, I would just pick one of the cheaper ones and not think about it too hard. You could pick that 2nd epiphany, which gives you the bonus 50% fixed shield. I believe that's every turn, but I haven't tested it. And if you want to play a counterattack build, then I would aim for either the 3rd epiphany, which gives you 2 counterattack each turn and 2 at the start, or ideally the 5th one, which is the 2 counterattack each turn and bonus counterattack damage, because counterattack damage cannot be increased in a lot of ways. There's really this card and then one other card that can increase your counterattack damage. There's not a lot of options. So if you want to build a counterattack build and pair her with Magna, I would very, very heavily suggest you try to get one of these 2, ideally Wolf's Dome 5. This is her legendary card, and it is her access to weaken, which I mentioned before is one of her strong defensive capabilities. When you're fighting against bosses that start to do, a swing for 900, a swing for 1000, a swing for 500, these things add up very quickly, and weaken becomes much stronger than the amount of effort it would take to get some shield to shield the equivalent amount. But in short, this gives you some shield, some counterattack, and weaken. You can upgrade that to get a little bit more. If you're playing a defensive build in general, I would probably go for this 1st epiphany option that gives you a little bit more shield and 2 weaken to all enemies. If you can duplicate this card, then every cycle you're getting 4 weaken to all enemies, which is very, very strong. But she does have a couple upgrade options at the end. There's one that helps you snipe enemies a little bit better. which I've never tried. I think it's maybe okay. The other one, and this is the one I'd probably try to pair if I was building a counterattack build, gives you fixed shield based off of how much counterattack you can have at the start of the turn. Now counterattack does cap at 10, and this is fixed shield, so it cannot be increased by something like resolve. This is basically if you have 10 counterattack, you will get 250% fixed shield, but it's at the start of the turn, which makes it a little bit difficult to use. I think it highly depends on other start of turn effects if they apply or don't apply before this. I haven't tested that myself, but you have to think about how the enemies will attack you at the end of your turn and they'll consume your counterattacks, right? So it may be difficult to get that maximum 250% fixed shield, but it is nice. And most importantly, if you play it that way, you're kind of already abandoning the full defensive build for Maribell, and you've already accepted that you're not going to be, fully super strong in the defensive department. So that is kind of an option there. Her her mythic is the Shelter Strike, which again is pulverized, so it will deal more damage against shields and does fixed damage equal to your shield owned. This is pretty straightforward. This is not nearly as strong if you are going a counterattack build because you won't have strong shields in the first place, but if you pair her with characters who are trying to stack a lot of shield and she's getting shields from other sources, she can get a really big number and just deal a really strong amount of damage. Now, fixed damage does mean that it cannot be buffed by things like Fortitude. I believe it cannot be amplified by things like Vulnerable, but I'm not 100% sure. But it can crit. I believe it can crit, okay, because I believe I've crit before with Orlea's damage. I don't have video evidence of that, so don't quote me on that, but I believe it can crit. It just can't be affected by most of the modifiers. So again, pretty straightforward character. This character doesn't have a lot of nuance and weird things in their kit. Maybe in the Maribell Shelter is where you kind of get some of the nuance with getting that shield that doesn't cap at 20% HP and making sure you're dealing damage to them while it's still getting the pulverize. That's probably the most complicated thing. As far as the neutral cards go, this character does have some decent neutral cards as opposed to Amir, who you really don't want any of them. If you are trying to get their elemental advantage, you may consider the Tackle, which does incredible, 400% defense-based damage and can cost 2 if you have maximum HP, but that's not going to happen a ton unless you're already kind of just cruising through an easy fight. But if you're struggling, this is not going to be a great card you want in your deck. The card that I would almost always add is Relentless Endurance. That is a 350% shield with the retain effect. You can just compare it to her 2 cost. That gives you 220% shield. You would want to get rid of this as soon as possible. It does give a counterattack with her upgraded potentials, I'm aware, but this 350% shield is a little bit better. And the most important thing is that it's retain. So you can use it to combo with a Shelter Strike. You can use it right before the enemy has a big damage nuke. You just have a lot of flexibility as long as you have that one slot for it to retain it. You can get a lot of, you can make sure that you maximize your value out of it because of the retain effect. So, and the nice thing is that this card is very cheap. It only costs 35 gold and I believe 25 gold when discounted in the shop. So when you're doing a Chaos Zero run, you can use your shop refreshes to try to find the 25 gold version, slot this in real quick, and it's a very good early to mid game card. And if you get a strong epiphany on it, I think it's still good, in the end game. And then next we have hand-to-hand combat, which is a 1 cost that does 200% defense-based damage, which is already pretty solid. It is an exhaust, so you can only use it once, but more than the one-time damage, you want that 2 crystallization. That is a free shield generation every turn for the rest of combat. That's exactly what Maribell and Magna want. These are perfect for them. This is a really good card that I have definitely underused in my runs that you should be putting in your hand whenever you can get it pretty inexpensively. Beyond that, the only other card I think worth mentioning is Iron Wall. Iron Wall gives you Resolve and Fortitude for first turn for 1 AP. And this is where, as I mentioned before, it's important to have a variety of different ways of damage negation. Fortitude will help you against those enemies, the enemies with a swarm where you're fighting 3 or 4 or 5 enemies that attack you a bunch of times each. These ones can very quickly become a pain in the butt if you if you don't have the AoE to deal with them quickly. And Iron Wall can really help mitigate their ability to cut you down with the Fortitude that reduces all of their ratios by 20%, because when they have small ratios reduced by 20%, that is a significant decrease. Now, of course, this won't do nearly as much against bosses, and that's where the Resolve kicks in. And so if you get an epiphany on this, it can easily be one of the strongest cards in your deck. Highly recommend you pick up 1, even maybe 2 Iron Walls if you have the AP to play it on turn 1. And the only other card here, I always look at this card, Devotion. It does defense-based damage times 2, so it's a 2 hit, and then it does bonus damage for each resolve. And I just always find there aren't enough sources of resolve in the game for this to be significant. Like if you could get 2 or 3 or 4 resolve, this might be interesting for devotion, but I just am always finding I maybe have 1, maybe have 2 resolve in the game, and I just can't commit to this card. So I probably would avoid that. And aside from that, there aren't other great pickups. Again, for the Vanguards, there aren't a lot of great options. Just the other classes just have a million great options. Not a ton here. So I probably would avoid most of the other cards. And that's it for her neutrals. So in my opinion, there are 2 primary playstyles for Maribell. There's one that is probably the more popular one, where you build her full tank. You don't really care about her counterattack mechanic. You don't care too much about pulverize. We focus purely on the shielding. So let's start by building a build for that first. You will generally want to get rid of her basic cards, the Shelter Kick, Shelter Defense, Shelter Hold. For Resolute Blitz, we don't care too much about this card. I would say just keep it cheap, because this has no defensive abilities within this card. It just has some counterattack. You could pick any of these. This one right here, maybe it will do fine. But again, actually, I'm probably just going to not even put it in my deck. For Maribell Shelter MK2, the goal here is to have as much shield as possible, but the shield amount that you can gain is capped at 20% of your max HP. So the first thing is, with Maribell, usually with most characters, we don't care about the HP stat, but Maribell actually likes more HP because that increases the amount of shield she can gain from Maribell Shelter MK.2, and that's why I'm going to be recommending HP in her memory fragments. But ignoring that for now, the main thing to think about is I want to make sure I get that shield as much as possible, and 2 ways you can do that. You can get that either through the one that makes your defense damage AoE, so it hits all enemies. So in an AoE fight, you're more likely going to be pulverizing some enemies, and you're going to be dealing more damage to make sure that you get that shield. So I would prefer either the AoE, or if you have enough AP, I would prefer the 2 cost that makes it deal quite a bit more damage. This will help again if you're hitting red enemies. This will help with some tenacity break, but more importantly, it will come close to guaranteeing that you get this 20% of max HP. Otherwise, this card can feel a little bit weak against units that have really high shields, but the 2 cost one can help you break through that. So I would probably recommend this one. For Wolves Dome, we don't care too much about this one because this is also a counterattack focused one, but if there are 2 defensive ones, there's one that gives you a 50% fixed shield per turn, which is small but nice and free, and then that's this Epiphany 2 here, and then the Epiphany 4 is one that gives you 2 resolve for 1 turn. So, but it is a skill that you have to play over and over. So it is low cost, but if you have a lot of draw, I would say keep the one that is a skill that you can keep playing for 0 cost. If you don't have a ton of draw, I would just go for the 1 upgrade that gives you the 1 cost upgrade that gives you a free shield per turn. And the reason I would potentially keep the 0 cost skill when most of the other options are upgrades when you have a lot of draw is because the 2 resolve for 1 turn is not something that you should be underestimating. There's not a lot of resolve in the game. Usually you just get it through neutral epiphanies. I don't think there's a lot of gear that generally has it, most other cards. There's not a lot of cards that have resolve in this game. Just in general, I think Amir has one. I can't remember. There's 1 or 2 other units, but very few. So having this resolve will buff all your shields that you generate for the rest of the turn, as long as they're not fixed shields. So this fixed shield will not benefit from it, and her Maribell shield will not benefit from it. But other shields do you generally generate from other units like Kalipe or like Amir that you're running with her will increase based off of that 2 resolve. So it can be really big. And then probably the most important one to upgrade is your OIC. If you get a chance to do a card epiphany, I would prioritize this one over the others. And that's because you can choose one of the 2 options that makes this from 1 weaken to 2 weaken to all enemies. Especially this one here that gives you 150% shield, a counterattack that you don't care about, and 2 weaken to all enemies. 2 weaken to all enemies is a 25% reduction in damage for 2 swings. And almost no matter the content, this can be really, really good, especially for bossing. This can buy you an extra turn or an extra 2 turns of time. And if your deck is small enough and you can cycle through this card a lot, or you can duplicate this card, you can get to a point where you're almost always having the weaken debuff on an enemy when they're attacking, which makes it a lot easier to shield their damage, which means you don't need heals as much, which means you take less stress damage. There are just so many benefits to having that repeated weaken. This is, in my opinion, the card that defines Maribell for her defensive playstyle. It is her legendary card that you want to be building around, and it is also the funnest name. It's just, oh, I see. The other options in general, I wouldn't be picking for a more defensive playstyle. Yes, there is one that gives you a repeated shield, but you have to be stacking counterattack for that, and we're not emphasizing that with this build. And then of course, don't forget that her ego skill does have a giant shield that you can use one time. I wouldn't be too greedy with it. Just remember, as long as you can get most value to completely block an instance of damage, I would use it early on. I don't think there's much reason to save it for a fight. Maybe there's a case where you want to stack it with the resolve that you get from Wolf's Dome here if you're getting the 4 cost or the Epiphany 4 as your option. But otherwise, I wouldn't be too greedy with that card as well. And then again, Shelter Strike just deals fixed damage based on shield owned. There are some cool combos you can do. You can combo this with a big Amir shield generated through her Metallicize with her own ego skill. But again, in general, don't be too greedy with this one either. You're kind of just going to be playing at the end of your turn based on how much shield you have to nuke an enemy. Yeah, so let's build the deck real quick. 1, 2, 3. Let's just prefer the one that gives a small shield. And then for Maribell, we already put in Maribell, and we actually don't care about the Resolute Blitz here, whichever one you pick. But beyond that, for neutrals, we love Relentless Endurance. Hand-to-hand combat is really good, even though it's a one-off. It exhausts away, so you can only use it once, but it's very strong. And then the highest priority card, in my opinion, is Iron Wall. This is really good for almost every Vanguard because there aren't a lot of sources of resolve, and having Fortitude, again, helps you have well-rounded defensive strategies when you're going through your Chaos runs, just to make sure that you have some small reduction so that if enemies are doing a lot of chip damage, you're not taking too much damage in total from that. So this is probably what I would suggest for a build. There maybe are a couple other options here, but I'm not huge on any of the other items. This would be my deck. So let's throw a quick name on it. We'll call it Maribell Defensive. And then for items, pretty straightforward. There are a lot of shield items in general. Lush Seawood is really good. There is one that gives, at the start of the turn, 40% fixed shield, the Growing Carapace, but these are specific to particular planets. So I wouldn't worry too much about this. Just kind of play whatever you hit. I don't think there's anything that really she has to build around, so I'm not even going to suggest a particular one there. So I'm going to save this deck, and now let's build her more offensive one. So in the offensive one, this is the counterattack build. We're trying to get as much counterattack as possible, but before we do the build, we need to talk about the counterattack mechanic because it is one of the most misunderstood mechanics in the game. So a brief overview of counter mechanics. It is fixed damage. It is not affected by vulnerable, morale, weakened, fortitude, etc. You cannot increase or decrease this by giving it different kinds of buffs like that or debuffs on the enemy. It does no tenacity damage. It does not benefit from elemental advantage, and contrary to popular belief, it does not benefit from extra attack damage. There is a weapon that gives you extra attack damage, and you do not care about that for Maribell because Maribell's damage is not considered extra attack on her counters. It also cannot crit. There have been a lot of people that suggest it can crit, and it can be a little bit confusing because Maribell has some sources of the damage that can crit. For example, when she does her Pulverize, and I believe there's a Resolute Blitz upgrade that makes it so that every turn you do defense-based damage to random enemies. It looks like a counterattack, but actually you're just attacking them. This can crit because it's based off of a particular card, but the counterattack itself cannot crit, which means if you're trying to maximize her crit, if you're trying to maximize her counterattack damage, yes, you could build a little bit of crit for the other sources of damage in Maribell's kit, but otherwise I wouldn't bother with crit at all. I think you want to get as much defense as possible because it is defense-based damage, and you want to make sure that you're getting the bonus 50% damage. So the way you increase your counterattack damage is by fully shielding the damage that triggered the counterattack that is here. So the idea is that if you shielded the attack, you get bonus 50% damage. If you didn't fully shield the attack, you will only deal, your regular 100% damage. And you can see that here in this little clip. I'm being attacked 6 times by an enemy and I have enough counterattack for it. I fully tank the first 2 hits and I deal 180 for both of those, but the latter 4 hits, I just take them as HP damage. I do not successfully shield them, and you can see they only do 120 to him. So if you want to deal a lot of damage to an enemy, 1, they have to hit you a lot, but 2, you have to be able to tank their damage with shields. And that's where it's really important to have not only shields, but again, resolve, fortitude, damage reduction. You'll want to be pairing her again with some other unit that gives some kind of shielding to make sure that you're able to fully fend off all of the enemy's attacks to make sure that you get maximum value from your counterattack. If you want to build the counterattack build, you're basically forced to pair her with Magna, who is also the counterattack queen, and they'll both counterattack on every attack. Magna has the ability to make her counterattacks AoE, and they can just deal a bunch of damage together. Looking at specific cards though, with the Resolute Blitz, we want to deal as much damage as possible. You can, it doesn't matter too much which one you get here. Some of them give you more counterattack. So if you don't have a lot of counterattack in your build, maybe you could pick one of those. Like these ones here, one is conditional on hitting the HP bar, one of them is not. And then this one does damage to all enemies and gives you counterattack. That one was probably one I would pick for a counterattack build, but you can also do one that just becomes an upgrade that hits all the enemies. So maybe let's pick this one. Maribell Shelter, it's not, in this case, the shield that you generate is not as important. In this case, we want to keep our counterattack stacks as high as possible, and then pick the one that increases damage for each of the characters' counterattack. This one here, the 4th Epiphany, it does defense-based damage, and then also increases by 50% for each of the characters' counterattack. And I haven't played it, but I assume this is additive. So this would be a total of a 650% defense-based damage ratio, which is really high. That's similar to what Haru gets when she has, most of her stacks on her anchor shot. This can be quite a big amount of damage. So I would start with those two. For Wolf's Dome, the 3rd Epiphany is okay, but the 5th Epiphany is definitely preferred. In this case, for your upgrade, you want an upgrade that gives 2 counterattack per turn to make sure that you're capping out at 10 as much as possible, because counterattack caps at 10. And again, with the Maribell Maribell.2, the previous card that we just looked at, it will deal more damage based on how much counterattack you have. So you don't want any of these 1 counterattack per turn options. So I would, again, Epiphany 3 is okay. Epiphany 5 is preferred to increase your counterattack damage even more, because again, there are not a lot of ways to increase your counterattack damage. So ones that just say they increase it, and of course, making sure you fully tank the enemy's damage are 2 ways to really increase it. So I would pick this one if I could. And I would almost say if you can't get this card in your run, I would not consider this a good counterattack run if you're trying to do the counterattack build. And then lastly, for OIC, this is unfortunately where, again, we're kind of walking away from Maribell as a fully defensive character, so we don't care too much about the shield and the weaken on her OIC card. We want to convert it into an upgrade here, and probably I'd pick this last upgrade so that you get shield based off of how much of your counterattack you have. So this is still a defensive option, but now it is an upgrade, so you don't have to actively play this card. And as you can see here, we've actually turned Maribell into a 3 upgrade 3 upgrade girl. She only has 1 attack remaining. Yes, you can keep Shelter Strike. I might even get rid of Shelter Strike so that this card becomes super light. And at this point, what you have is you have a character that does a lot of counterattacks, but also has upgraded most of her deck away. You can maybe have a slot for a Relentless Endurance. Iron Wall is still good here, just in general as a card. But beyond that, you can now play. You're free to play with Magna. Magna has some upgrades in her own kit, but she has more skill cards that she recurringly plays, and Maribell has upgraded away most of her kit. And so this is how I would play the counterattack build. I think if you can hit some of these are kind of specific epiphanies, so it's unlikely that you'll hit all of these, but especially if you can start with the good Wolves Domination and the OIC that can really get your counterattacks going, you can lean into that if you have Magna on your team and just go for a full counterattack build. So I'm going to name this the Maribell Counterattack. Counterattack. And I believe there are a few items that give counterattack, like the Wild Fur Cloak and the Swamp of Judgment. Again, you would have to be running specific things here, and is there one here? No, there isn't. So are you going to hit this every time? No, and you have to be doing a particular run, but if you do, it will make your counterattack stronger. But again, remember your counterattacks cap at 10, and so you have to have this little balance of, I want to make sure I'm capping at 10 so that my Pulverize does as much damage as possible, and I get as much shield from OIC, but I don't want to be gaining a ton of counterattack when I already have 10 if the enemy doesn't attack a lot, because then I kind of wasted my potential by overstacking something that maxes out at 10. Now, having said all of that, it's important to note that counterattacks are currently bugged. All those interactions I just stated are how it currently works, but I don't think that's intended, and that's because Magna has, for her E4, her Ego Manifest 4 upgrade, it says that her counterattacks are not supposed to consume Vulnerable, which implies they're supposed to benefit from Vulnerable without consuming it, but neither Magna's nor Maribell's counterattacks interact with Vulnerable at all. And so a lot of this, in terms of how to build her, in terms of how to build Maribell, I would say right now, just wait. If you want to do the counterattack build, wait wait until they fix it, because if it does interact with crit, cool, then we should get crit stuff on Maribell. But for now, I would recommend in general for memory fragments, go defensive, just get as much defense as possible, maybe HP, maybe attack, but don't worry too much about crit right now, because counterattack doesn't interact with crit, and it doesn't interact with vulnerable. You just can't increase it in that many different ways. So when we talk about team comp ideas, the nice thing about the Maribell defensive build is it can go with just about any 2 other characters that you want, as long as those characters synergize. Maribell is not a unit like Calliope, who really wants characters that can synergize with Celestial, or Amir, who really wants characters that can build shield. She's kind of like Magna, who is kind of independent. She can be paired with other units, including Maribell and Magna together, but they don't have to be for defensive. You could pair her with any 2 characters that synergize, whether that be, Mei Lin and Selena, or Beryl and Orlea. You could just really put whoever you want, because Maribell will fulfill the role of a tanky unit who does a little bit of damage all by herself. She doesn't need any other synergies. And so I'm not even going to suggest particular characters. You can explore and find what works, as long as the other 2 characters have synergy. Maybe it's a DPS and a support, and you'll find Maribell slots in just perfectly with them. Again, you can look up for some of these neutrals. You can look to make her team a little bit stronger, especially Iron Wall. And I also particularly like Relentless Endurance, but she's quite flexible in terms of her defensive build. Now, if we look at her counterattack build, and again, I need to preface this with Maribell's counterattack build right now, I would not recommend it, because counterattack is bugged. It does not interact with vulnerable, and we don't know what all it is supposed to interact with. It doesn't interact with crit. It doesn't interact with morale, like the damage is not increased. So right now, I would not recommend this, but if you were to build it, you would definitely pair her with Magna, so they can counterattack together, because they are kind of the counterattacking Vanguard fiends. And then your third option, you could build a supportive type character with Orlea, who also has some shields. You could pair her with Amir, so that you're basically going a fully defensive build with counterattacks and Amir's metallicize. There's a lot of different options for how you could pair with her, but probably you're going kind of a 3 defense comp at that point, or a 2 defense plus support, because the 2 units that are going for counterattacks, which is Maribell and Magna, are going to take up a lot of your AP and a lot of just your investment. So I probably wouldn't put a DPS as the third character, because they're not going to be supporting that character really well. But again, this is bugged. We know that the devs are supposed to be, or hopefully they're working on this. I don't think it's their highest priority, but I would generally avoid building a full counterattack build for now. For partners, again, the partner economy is pretty simple so far. We don't have a lot of partners to choose from, especially because they're class restricted, and sometimes they're also element restricted. So this is pretty straightforward. But for Maribell, there are only 6 Vanguards to choose from. 2 of them, or 3 of them, are 5-star, but Zeta is basically paired with Calliope because she has the instinct buff, and you won't run her with Maribell. But the other 2 5-stars both do really well. Aishlin is a little bit more defensive. It does do some damage, but it buffs your heal and shield gain a little bit. You can see here, it helps you retain your shield. So if you want to play the more defensive style of Maribell, which is more universally useful, I would definitely go for Aishlin. She is pick upable in the battle pass, and I may pick her up. I'm not 100% sure just yet, but Aishlin is probably a good pick. Erica is the one you get from the standard draw, but she is meant to buff counterattacks. Now, I would not suggest this right now, because again, counterattack is bugged, but if and when you do get this partner and they fix counterattack, then you could pair with them, because this one buffs counterattacks a little bit more. It increases your counterattack damage. Whenever you use a skill or upgrade card, you potentially gain counterattack, and Maribell and other units you pair her with, like Magna, do have a decent amount of skills in their kit. And then you can see here, she can gain more counterattack, and if the enemies are going to attack, she'll gain even more counterattack. So Erica is basically the counterattack fiend, but again, I wouldn't run counterattack just yet. As far as 4-stars go, Rachel is the better choice of the 2. She will increase your, she will give you a chance to gain counterattack whenever you gain a shield, which is what Maribell wants. She wants to make sure she's maxing out counterattack. And she also has draw, which is just a really good ego skill. Anything that gives you draw generally is very useful. Wilhelmina is the one I'm running because that's the only one I have, but which just goes further to show that you can clear most content without having like this partner's base gear for every single thing, but Wilhelmina just increases your defense in general, which is nice for increasing your damage from counterattacks and from your other skills. But she does more damage, or she does additional damage when you target a vulnerable enemy, but I don't know if this 100% works because, again, her counters aren't interacting with vulnerable. So there's just some bugs with how the counters work in general, and I'm not 100% sure if you're getting that value from Wilhelmina as well. I generally find her ability here to gain you 2 morale and 1 fortitude. Again, because morale doesn't affect counterattacks, it's just not as useful. So Wilhelmina I would avoid as well, but it's the one I'm running because it's the only one I have. So yeah, in terms of order of priority, I would say Aishlin is the best if you are playing a defensive build. Otherwise, any of the others are probably good if you have her counterattack build, but let's wait on that. Now, Maribell's potentials unfortunately aren't the best, again, because she doesn't get defense within these. She has her standard, you get your buffs to your basics, your neutrals, and your uniques, and this one here will add 1 counterattack to her basic shield cards, the 1 and 2 cost. As usual, you want to generally get as much in the unique cards as possible because the goal generally for your chaos runs is to remove as many of your basic cards as possible. If you want to play lots of neutrals, you can buff her neutrals. I haven't done that too much just yet, but especially the one that the 2 cost that has the retain can be really nice to be a little stronger, but these are very expensive to farm, so I'm going to keep that at 1 for now. Her 2 buffs to stats are crit chance and stamina, which doesn't make a ton of sense to me because she wants HP. She wants HP, yes, for the extra bonus here in her final cap to her potential, but aside from that, you would really wish that she could get defense because so much of her damage scales off of defense. And her crit chance, again, crit chances, or it's not crit chances bug, but counters are bugged. They don't interact with crit chance. So I don't know if they're going to add in the crit back to counter. If they don't, then I would call this dead in the water and you just put 1 and done. For this one, I wouldn't fully stack it because then you would be relying on Maribell's other sources of damage, and her counter makes up at least half of her damage, so not being able to crit on it feels like a waste of resources, again, because potentials are so expensive to farm. As we're finding more and more, these characters are very expensive to farm. You should be very judicious with who you're investing in. And then her basic card proficiency gives you more shield, and if your health is, passes a threshold, you get an additional 5%. I would only do this if you have struggle in the early game, but again, I wouldn't put this on a character like Maribell, who's not going to be topping the DPS charts in general. I probably wouldn't be spending on her potential here. And the last one is the one that I probably would do, which is any defense-based attack damage will be a little bit stronger if she reaches a certain threshold, which will increase her damage for her basic attack for 2 of her cards that deal damage. And then also, I don't know if it will interact with counter. I really hope it does, but I'm not 100% sure. But I will probably do this one for my final cap for Maribell. So I'll probably do 1, 1, and then 1, and call that a day for Maribell and save my resources for other units like Veronica, who deal more passion damage. As far as memory fragments go, again, this will change a little bit depending on what type of build you want. If you want Maribell to be as defensive as possible, I would basically say pick up the 2 set for HP, pick up the 2 set for defense, and just put whatever you want for the other 2 stats. Maybe focus on substats, especially if you're not trying to min-max just yet. Even if you're going the counter route, I would recommend this for now. I wouldn't recommend like pulling a lot and grinding potentials or grinding memory fragments a ton to try to get really good memory fragments, because we don't know how the counter we don't know how the counter mechanic is supposed to work. But you'll probably end up with like the 2 set for the defense and a 4 set for maybe crit, depending on how they rework counter. We just don't know. So for now, I would say stick with the 2 piece for defense, 2 piece for HP, and call it a day. Anything else, you can just run whatever you want. I am running some crit chance here in case I happen to get lucky, but it really doesn't matter too much for right now. Then for her dupes, again, the nice thing about Maribell is she doesn't get crazy strong with any particular dupe, so she's very serviceable just at Ego 0 with no dupes. But her first dupe will increase her shelter strike to base scale off of 150% of shield own instead of 100%, so this will deal more damage. She gets more shield gain with her second one. Her third and fifth, as is usual for 4 stars, they buff all of their cards. Her fourth one makes her ego skill scale off of 450% shield instead of 350%, which will be nice, but again, I'm clearing most content just fine without it. And then the last one makes it so that the first counterattack from Maribell each turn deals extra damage based on how much shield she has. So if you're doing the counterattack build, this will be even stronger. If you're building her as a purely defensive unit, this is almost irrelevant. And so as you can see here, she doesn't really need 6. For her to be a defensive character, she doesn't really need 6 or 5 or maybe 4. 3-2, and maybe 1. Like she really only cares about the Ego 4, where this Unbreakable becomes plus 100%. Everything else is just kind of whatever. So again, the nice thing with Maribell, you can play her perfectly as a free to play. I'm playing her with probably the worst 4-star partner for her, and doing just fine. So that's my take on the growth mechanics for her. And that's it for the Maribell guide. I'd say at this point, the main takeaways are that she's very serviceable, she's very good, even at low dupes. Her greater dupes don't make her that much better of a character. She's one of the strongest shielding units. I would argue she is the strongest shielding unit because she doesn't have a lot of other mechanics that she wants to be built around. She's not like Emir or not like Calliope that have metallization, and Calliope has her Celestial that you kind of have to form a team comp around them. Maribell will easily slot as the third tanky unit to any comp pretty much that you want. If you want to do her counter build, I would probably wait on it until they fix the counter builds, the counter mechanic. I know I sound like a broken record at this point and probably mentioned it a dozen times, but we just don't know what you should be building at this point. So, but yeah, how are you building your Maribell? Are you finding success with her in team comps? Is she as tanky as you want her to be? Are there any strategies you're using that I forgot to mention? And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.